300 years ago, the goddess Gaia loved humans. She prepared a gift for the Hellenear Empire that followed her. The goddess carefully gathered love and light to create a holy soul and sent it to the purest couple in the empire. A saint was born. However, the aristocrats could not stand that such an honor was given to ordinary commoners. So they ruthlessly slaughtered their family and then locked the saint in a white castle, completely isolating her from people. When the girl turned 15, the aristocrats discovered that her blood had healing properties. To satisfy their desires, they began to collect her. Amidst the colors and loneliness, blood slowly began to flow down her body. It was raining. Angry townspeople were chasing the witch. The knight, carrying the girl in his arms, found a cave to hide in. The girl, barely breathing, said his name, Avion. She asked for his forgiveness. She said she wished, in her next life, to live as an ordinary girl, not a saint. She stroked Avion's face, where she would be someone's daughter, where she could be someone's wife and then a mother. She asked him to forgive her for making her do all this. The life of a saint is too hard. So, she continued, if she became an ordinary girl in her next life, she was truly grateful to him, and smiling at him, she closed her eyes and collapsed. Avion called out to her, but there was no answer. Sitting on the floor, holding her in his arms, he hugged the girl tightly, asking her to hold on just a little longer. Begging her not to leave him, he burst into bitter tears. Gritting his teeth in pain, the man screamed, calling out to the goddess Gaia. He asked her what the saint had done wrong. Even after being locked in darkness and left alone, she continued to give her blood. Her whole body covered in blood and pus, the saint never resented it, not once. He yelled that if she just wanted to steal everything from her, he shouldn't have given her anything at all. He begged her to let her live a normal life. Sobbing even harder, he shouted for Gaia to be cursed. Jiel opened her wet eyes. She was having that dream again. The maid was inviting her to breakfast. She couldn't eat anything. Her brother complained to her father, but her father asked his daughter not to make a sour face, for which he got a kick from his wife. She suddenly said that lately she had been having a strange dream in which a silver-haired knight was crying. The girl thought for a moment and continued that if you think about it that way, wasn't she a saint in a past life? Silence. The father laughed harshly, brimming with tears from laughter. The son hinted that he had better stop. The father apologized for going overboard. That's right. What's wrong with Jiel? Even though her eyes aren't golden, she's as beautiful as a saint. When he said that, he laughed with renewed vigor, saying that she is not even close to a saint. The brother asked his sister to put the fork back. Riding in the carriage with her brother, she resented how her father could do such a thing to his daughter's only dream, and on a day like this. Her brother thought her dream was strange, especially strange on Isonge's day. Isonge. In memory of Saint Mary, beloved by the goddess Gaia, an event is held when noble ladies gather at the palace of Helipan where she lived. The coachman announced that they were almost there. The girl looked out of the window. The palace was visible in all its glory. They stopped, the brother giving his hand to his sister, who gazed admiringly only at the palace. His brother looked around, saying that it looked like Estelle hadn't arrived yet. Jiel wanted to go alone, look around, and wait inside, but he was very worried that she would get lost. It was crowded, and he wasn't allowed to go with her. His sister assured him that all the noble ladies were there. What could happen? Besides, she's 20 now, she's an adult. Walking around the palace, she actually got lost, hoping to meet someone. The girl noticed the statue of Mary, and the knight bowed before her. It was beautiful. Examining them, she thought the knight's face was very familiar to her. Tears streamed down her face. Her chest began to pound. She didn't know what was happening. She had never felt anything like this before. Tears were pouring from her eyes. She didn't know what kind of man was depicted in the statue, and she didn't understand why her heart was breaking. Her breathing became labored, and she collapsed to the ground, unconscious. A man came up to her and took her in his arms and told her that everything was fine, so she didn't need to go back to those nightmares, because he would take care of her now. He touched her crying face and said he hoped she could live a normal life like she wanted to. The man asked Jiel to breathe, slowly, telling her that everything was okay. She opened her eyes and saw a handsome, statuesque man with dark hair in front of her, and she said he was handsome. Her unexpected act made her very embarrassed. He gave her a hand, asking her to stand up. She apologized for the inconvenience, to which the man replied, nothing, but he was glad she liked his face, and he smiled. The girl blushed. They introduced themselves. The man's name was Ravnar. She could just call him Rav. She thought she was completely crazy because she really liked him. He explained that the palace was quite confusing and it was difficult to get in here. The girl replied that she was lost. He offered to escort her to the venue. She talked about her family and how she was embarrassed by the fact that they were treating her like a little girl, and she was in her 20s. And she asked how old Ravnar was. He hesitated, saying he didn't know exactly, probably 27. She smiled enigmatically and drifted off into thought. Their difference is 7 years. If she marries him, she will have the wedding sooner than she expected. Rav asked what she was thinking. The girl hesitated and replied that she loved her beautiful family. He smiled, saying that she looked happy now. A woman's voice called out behind them. An angry Estelle was quickly approaching them. She grabbed Jeriel's arm and pulled her to her, yelling at the man to get away from her now. Estelle looked at him. He seemed strange to her. His gaze looked dangerous. Jeriel stopped her, explaining that he had helped her, and asked that she remove the spirits she had threatened Ravnar with. The girl apologized and introduced herself. She was the eldest daughter of the Duke of Balamis, Estelle Balamis. I asked the man tactlessly what family he was from. After introducing himself, he said that unfortunately he was a commoner, so he couldn't answer. Estelle was surprised that a commoner was in such a place, and even with a sword. Jeriel looked at the sword. It seemed familiar. He said goodbye and left. Jeriel was very upset. They had almost met. She didn't want him to leave. She wondered where it was, almost as if it was another person's emotions. When she left the palace, the girl was in a kind of mesmerized state. He asked Estelle what was wrong with her, and she put her hand to her head and said that she didn't know, but she was leaving, so he would have to find out for himself. My sister suddenly said she likes someone. His name is Rav, and he's the handsomest guy she's ever seen. His dark hair and violet eyes are so wonderful. Her brother tried to protest, but she only replied that it was a terrible thing to be jealous. Turning around, she added that it was a secret, but he was a commoner. Then, shining with happiness, she said, "Status isn't the main thing," and ran off merrily into the carriage. Ed was alarmed. He didn't like that fact. At home, the brother met with his father, telling him what had happened and saying that it looked like he had shown up. Given Estelle's reaction, there was no doubt. Dad said it's time. They need to prepare. They need to stop the Saints' awakening. They need more blood. An unknown man in a cloak was watching Jeriel walk. She was choosing jewelry, taking one. The man accompanying her explained to her that it was a hatchel, a piece of jewelry not for clothing, but for a sword. The merchant admired the girl, saying that she had a diamond eye, the emerald hakol symbolizing happiness. The peridot kakol symbolizes friendship, but the emerald one symbolizes someone's happiness. These are given to family members. Jeriel shrieked enthusiastically at the purchase. She pondered whether to take something for her father and brother. The man asked in surprise who it was for. The girl shirked, as if he didn't need to know. Someone tried to touch Jeriel, and Klimp grabbed him. He asked what he was doing, and if he had any business with the young mistress. The girl turned around and saw Ravnar. Klimp pointed his sword at the man, but he didn't move, staring at him with confidence. Jeriel screamed to stop, but he ordered the young mistress to stay behind, covering her with himself. He thought he had been practicing swordsmanship for a long time, but this was the first time he had seen such a monster. The girl was frightened and kicked Klimp so that he fell. She explained to him that Rav was her friend and his rudeness was unforgivable. She asked him to apologize for the servant's behavior, and she wished to make it up to him. Saying this, the girl clutched the hakol in her hands. After some thought, Rav asked if she would do him a favor. She gladly agreed. He drew his sword and put it to Klimp's neck and asked if she would give him the life of the brute. The girl was horrified. She blanched, saying that Klimp was a knight who was dear to her family. Tears began to appear in her eyes. She was ready to give him anything, but begged him not to hurt Klimp. Ravnar smiled, hiding his sword. He said it was a joke. In relief, the girl covered her face with her hat. He took her hand and apologized. After asking her out, they were walking through the woods. Taking the girl by the hand, he told her they were almost there and asked her to walk carefully. He noticed her limp. Ravnar took her in his arms, saying it looked like she had hurt her leg when she hit that night. Not much left, so he offered to carry her. She was extremely embarrassed. Her cheeks turned pink and she lowered her hat. After a while, they arrived at the place. The sea, vast and beautiful, the sun shone brightly. The girl was amazed by the beauty. Setting her down on the rocks by the water, Ravnar told her to dip her feet. The cold would ease the pain. He asked if she liked it. She replied that it was wonderful. Jiel blushed, trying to hide her face with her hat. She said she wanted to thank him all day if that was okay with him. And she asked if there were any girls who had given him hachol. Ravnar knelt down before her, right in the water. Looking at her face, he said there were no such things, but he really hoped he could get one from her if she would let him. He held out his sword to her, offering to attach the hachol. The girl stared at it, remembering where she had seen it. Suddenly she said in surprise that it was just like the sword of Baluk held by the holy knight Avion, and it was the same in the portrait, white and with the same silver pattern. However, Avion's trail was gone, and Baluka was stolen. She asked what this sword simply looked like. Rav remained silent. Jiel apologized. She was talking too much. She really likes the story of the saint and Avion. Smiling, he replied that it was fine. He was fine too. Seeing her so happy made him feel warm. He asked her if she would have any problems, reminding her that he was a commoner. She blushed and said his status didn't matter, her feelings wouldn't change. He smiled, but he wasn't okay with that. He didn't want her to be bullied. Standing up and extending his hand to her, Rav said that if he won in Rabari, he would swear his loyalty to her as a knight. He asked if Jiel would trust and wait for him. The girl faltered. Emperor Rabari's gladiatorial tournament would involve Ed, and he's pretty strong. She was worried Rav might get hurt. Before she took his hand, she said she had one condition. He must stay out of the way, and if it was dangerous, he must refrain from getting involved. Smiling, he agreed, and the girl took his hand. He was sure he would keep their promise. During the night as Jiel slept, her father and brother came to her, saying they could finish sooner than expected. They injected her with something. Final Ribbery. The host announces the contenders for the winner's place. There's a strong guy in the field who flew in here like a comet, and his rival, Edmund Haim, is a brilliant swordsman from the Marquis of Haim's family. It was time to find out who would emerge as the winner in this competition. Jiel was very excited. It's early. Ed has been watching for an hour as his sister can't decide on an outfit. Putting on another one, his brother assesses her appearance as beautiful. Suddenly he says that if she loves him, he will not stand in her way. Overjoyed, she grabbed his hands, thanked him, and told him he was the only one on her side. Battlefield. Jiel from the podium searches for Ravnar with her eyes. Estelle asked indignantly who she was looking for. Suddenly, the girl shouted, "Rav!" Rav pulled off his hood and turned to her, smiling sweetly. Jiel waved at him happily. She thought he looked adorable. The speaker announces that Ravnar is an ordinary knight, having fought with a one-handed sword since the beginning of Rabari. He wonders what he can surprise the audience with today. The fight begins. Ravnar draws a shining sword from its sheath. The audience is shocked. The members of the imperial family were confused. One of them shrieked in surprise when he learned that Ravnar was a swordmaster. The opponent attacks, and Rav deftly knocks his sword out of his hands, bringing his own to his neck. His opponent surrenders. The crowd cheers. The boy turns around and waves to Jiel. On his sword was a hackle given by the lady. He took it in his hands and kissed it gently. The girl blushed. On the other side of the podium sat the male aristocrats. They saw Ravnar's signs of attention towards Jiel. One of them was indignant, addressing the Marquis. His daughter had rejected his marriage proposal. But what was her father thinking, passing her off as a commoner? Her father spread his hands, saying it was his mistake. But what kind of parents would go against their children? She's still young and doesn't know much, but they love each other. Not even their father can stop them. He went on, but still a commoner? His status would change tomorrow. The man objected and said that Ravnar was hiding the fact that he was a swordmaster. Wasn't that a crime? The emperor ordered it to stop. He did not want to watch this spectacle on this beautiful day. After the fight, an angry Ed approached Ravnar, who was under the bleachers, and asked why he used the sword if it wasn't necessary. Rav didn't answer anything, and then Ed assumed his sister was in danger and huffed. Ravnar saw how much he looked like his sister and stroked his head, saying at the same time that he doesn't think anything will happen, but it's best to be prepared. Whether the event of 4 years ago would happen again, there was no need to worry, because this time it would be different. The man smiled and went to the field. He introduces the long-awaited final and its contestants, Edmund Haim and Ravnar. Exciting the audience, he wonders who will be the winner. Ravran noticed that Ed had eyes like Jeriel's. This almost gave Edmund a chance to hurt him, but he was too agile. The fight was over. Ravran won. Standing before the emperor, he asked what the victor wished for. Rav thought about it. 320 years ago he had made a wish in this place. Because he felt sorry for her, wanted to intercede. He wished to leave Rabari Castle and refused to become successor. This time it would be different. Kneeling before the emperor, Ravrin said that he wanted to enter Rabari Castle and become his successor, because he didn't want to make a stupid election like he did then. Riberi, founder of the Hellenaire Empire, a relative of the Holy Knight Avion. 500 years ago, this family gave birth to many brilliant magicians and ministers, in addition to having the greatest number of saints. After Avion's death, the imperial family took over her name, but if a successor comes along, they will be obligated to return the family to him. Father looked at Ravnar, thinking that he already owned thousands of books on magic, but wanted the records and relics related to the saint. Kitahin protested. He appealed to His Majesty, saying that if he honored his request, the entire kingdom would fall into disrepair. How a commoner can become a duke in a day? The emperor jumped up from his chair and shouted furiously that he had the right to fulfill any wish of the victorious Rabari. How dare he challenge him? He sat down and thought about it. Mana had ceased to exist now, so magic books and artifacts had become useless. It was perfectly acceptable, and if he fulfilled his wish, he would become the emperor who fulfilled the biggest wish. What bothered him was the swordmaster who appeared after 5 years. Ravnar's skills and abilities were recognized. The wish was fulfilled, and he became the heir to Riberi. He went to Jiel. As he approached the podium, she rushed to him and threw herself into his arms. Her hat came off, she looked up at him, and reaching higher, she kissed Ravnar. He was amazed, taking her hands in his. He said he had loved her from the first time they met and asked for permission to be with her. A fragment from the past. A knight kneeling confesses his love to a saint, saying in Latin, "My love is in your heart." The girl answers him, "My love is yours." Standing on the battlefield, Ravnar said that he loved Jiel. She was embarrassed and happily replied that she did too. Had always loved him, very much. Seeing what was happening, the family rushed to the girl. The father shouted to Ravnar that he would not allow it even after a public confession. The boy smiled back, saying that his father could call him whatever he wanted, like son-in-law. His brother protested, for they were not yet betrothed. Rav turned to Jiel and asked if they would be betrothed. The girl asked if it was necessary, and if he wished, they could go on a date. The father struggled to stand on his feet. The Marquis asked where Ravnar was staying. The boy replied that if his father-in-law would allow it, he could stay at Haim Manor. Jiel glowed with happiness. Arriving at the manor, Rav elegantly offered his hand to the girl exiting the carriage. His brother, passing by, said he thought his sister would be alone forever. And Rav merrily ruffled his hair. Ed asked him to stop, to which he replied, apologizing that he was so eager to try. At dinner, the girl couldn't believe her happiness that she was dining with Rev. It was like she was in a dream, and she was very embarrassed. Turning to his wife, the father said that if their son-in-law continued to live here, his daughter would starve to death. He could not remember the last time she had eaten so little. The mother threatened her father with her fork, and he fell silent. Ravnar sliced the meat and suggested to Jiel that if she had no appetite, perhaps she might try it this way. The girl melted at his attention. She looked at his lips and was a little saddened that she wasn't tall enough to reach them that time, and only reached up to his chin. Her brother asked her if she was tired, suggesting that she lie down early tonight. Her father agreed and asked the maid to escort her out. Jiel didn't want to go, but she couldn't cross her father. She stood up and said goodbye to Rav. In her room, she wove a wreath of flowers and imagined their sweet kiss in the garden. She could think of nothing else. Late at night, her father came into her room, and after checking that his daughter was asleep, he invited Ravnar to come in. He saw the wreath lying on the floor and picked it up sadly. Her father uncovered her. Ravnar approached and touched her forehead. Her hair and eyelashes glowed gold. Rav took out a needle and pierced the skin on his wrist with it. He turned back to his father, who was pulling the blade from its sheath. His son stopped him and asked him to let him today. The father refused, saying he was too young. It was his duty as a father. And he has to protect his mother and sister when his father is not around. The father cut his hand, and the blood flowed onto the carpet. From the carpet, it suddenly rose up and began to enter the girl's arm. The brother covered his nose and mouth with his hand. Tears were protruding in his eyes. He thought this must be very painful for her. He prayed that the saint's blood would just disappear. He wondered why his sister specifically. No one would want that kind of power. He really hoped she wouldn't remember anything. 4 years ago, an exhausted father rides in a carriage, complaining about how difficult the assignment was and how tired he was of it. The Marquis presents the Emperor with the Nukta monster he captured in the Pokaria Gorge. In front of him is a huge cage covered with cloth. The Emperor waved, saying he would look at it later, ordering it to be locked up somewhere at the Marquis' estate. He couldn't keep such a beast in the imperial palace. His father was angry about it. He didn't understand why he should have asked to bring it in the first place, so he took the monster to his estate. At home, he was greeted joyfully by his children. Edmund noticed something covered in cloth. His father said it was a reward from His Highness. He began to hug him, turning the subject to how he had grown in his absence. The boy pushed him away, saying that he was already 13 and his father didn't take him with him. He wants to see Nukta too. Jiel waved her finger, remembering her father's words that even if his son outgrew him, he still couldn't win. The father laughed, praising his daughter. Edmund trained, thinking he was all grown up and wanted to ride with them. He would become the second swordmaster of the Haim family, one of 4 in the Empire. The guards were discussing the monster. They were worried that he might get out. They didn't like having to guard it after returning from the gorge. They thought no one would notice if they left. A boy spotted them, hiding in the bushes. He watched what was happening. Jiel crept up behind him, and he was afraid. He thought that if he showed Nukta, she would like it too. He offered to show her something fun. They entered the dungeon. The girl didn't like the strange smell, and her father had forbidden them to go there, but her brother promised to protect her. They stood outside Nuktu's cell. Nothing could be seen, just darkness. Suddenly, the eyes flashed, and the monster went berserk, scaring the children. The boy reassured his sister, saying that the monster was under lock and key. The monster began furiously scratching the bars. The children were terrified and could not move. Suddenly, a huge beast with long claws, sharp fangs, and fur as black as pitch broke free. It roared and sank its claws into Edmund's chest. The boy hung on his paw, bleeding. Jiel sat on the floor and cried, unable to move for fear. The monster bit Ed's arm, and the girl screamed. Ed was still conscious. The sister grabbed a wooden stick and started hitting the beast. The monster turned around, and the brother was horrified. He pleaded, "Not her." Ed shoved the sword at Nukta's eyes. The beast roared and collapsed to the floor. The bloody brother sat motionless. Edmund's in bed. The whole family's gathered around. The doctor says the poison is spreading from his arm to his heart. If he keeps this up, he won't last a day. A man insists on amputating his arm. The father is terrified, begging the doctor to help in another way, at any cost. The doctor says there's no other choice. If they want less pain, they must do it themselves. The father is furious and grabs the doctor by the scruff of the neck. Ed opened his eyes, begging his father's forgiveness, tears streaming down his face. He considered the Haim's amputated heir, a knife in his parents' back. The father falls to his knees in front of his son, reassuring him that he will survive. His father will save him. Jiel, feeling guilty, begins to sob. Her mother puts her arm around her shoulders. The father picks up his sword, determined to save his son. Jiel's hair turns golden, and unaware of what she is doing, she takes her brother's sword and cuts her own hand, sending drops of blood into his face. In the same instant, Ed's hand becomes completely healthy. Jiel smiles and faints, falling to the floor before her mother can grab her. The doctor was horrified. He shouted that it was holy blood, and he called the girl a saint. 300 years ago. The crowd under the White Castle begs the saint to give them her blood. She cuts her finger and gives her blood. People discussed its magical properties, saying that if one bathed in its blood, would one live forever? If one wore clothes in the holy blood, if one drank the holy blood. People wanted more holy blood, and it was spilled every day. The goddess Gaia couldn't watch her daughter suffer, and in the end, she took that power away. No longer could the blood of a saint heal people. Standing in front of the emperor, he yelled at her, "How dare she, witch?" He thought she was trying to pass herself off as a saint. He issued an order. The sinner Mary would be burned at the stake. The girl was horrified at his words. Jiel's mother, crying over her daughter, cried out that her daughter was not a saint. The doctor jumped up, shouting that they needed to report to the palace immediately. Father prevented him from doing so. Jiel opened her eyes. They were golden in color, just like her hair. She began to scream furiously in pain. Her parents tried to calm her down. Her father ordered no one to come in. Jiel screamed. She begged for it to stop. She said she wasn't a witch. Her father realized that she was remembering what had happened 300 years ago. the torture she went through. A flash of light, a magical seal appeared on the floor, and a man with a sword appeared before them. The father ordered his wife to hold Jiel tighter and drew his sword. The girl looked at it and said Avion. The man in the cloak pushed the Marquis's sword away and headed towards the girl, claiming she needed him. He touched her face, telling her to calm down and look into his eyes. Taking her in his arms, holding her palm tightly, he told her it was a dream. He convinced her it was all a dream, a nightmare. Now he would protect her, she would never have nightmares again. But the girl replied that she was a saint. She had to heal people. Avion said she was not a saint, but Jiel. The girl was sure she must be alone. He assured her that her family and he were all with her. No one would leave her. She would not be alone. She begged him not to leave. He said he wouldn't leave. She needed to close her eyes and sleep. The mother burst into tears, screaming hysterically that her daughter is not a saint. She doesn't need to go to the Holy Palace. She can't send her little girl away. They don't even know what they will do to her there. Father held Dell, trying to reassure her that no one would take her. Father thought he had to hide Jiel, but he didn't know where. The stranger suddenly said there was a way to hide her abilities. The father asked if he was the reincarnation of the Holy Knight, and if his daughter was a saint. The man replied that she was not a saint, and he was no longer a holy knight. Ravnar, that's his name. Father pondered Ravnar, the sword resembling Beluka, so also Jiel's reaction. He was definitely not human. He didn't know if they could trust him, if he was making the right choice. He asked how they were going to do that. Ravnar put the girl on the floor and stood up, saying they needed to shut up everyone involved first. The father shut down the doctor. Ravnar suggested options for how things would unfold. They could erase or seal their memories. If they were weak mentally, erasing their memories would turn them into idiots. It's risky to seal, but not so dangerous to your health. The doctor has seen the girl change. She's the second saint in the last 300 years, so her memories are strong. Ravnar offered to kill the doctor. He pronounced a cantham, his father shocked, thinking it was a sword from the magic vault. The room was covered in darkness. A magical seal flashed, and a man appeared before them. Bowing to Ravnar, he asked if he had summoned him. He ordered him to take the doctor and make it look like an accident. The man took the doctor on his shoulder and carried him away with a magic seal, disappearing into the room. The father eyed the boy suspiciously, a non-human creature using magic. He thought he was an elf or a celestial being, but only demons could summon other demons as helpers. He asked what they say. Gaia opened the gates of heaven for him. Why did he become a demon? Ravnar answered, so as not to repeat the same mistakes. He'll seal their memories and put restrictions on everything else. But if a lot of people die at once or become idiots, it's suspicious. Unless the memory was something special to them, the seal would hold. The father shrieked, wondering if it would break. The man only replied that he would handle it personally. Father asked if he would seal Jiel's memory. Ravnar was angry, saying it was all Gaia's doing. First, she gives the ability. Then she takes it away, the horrible creature. He'd cast a spell so that when her seal broke, he'd be automatically summoned. The boy asked if anyone had left the manor. Dad replied that since the attack on Ed, everyone has been forbidden to leave the house, and everyone is being watched. Everyone is here, so he can just seal the memories of those left behind. Ravnar closed his eyes, and magic began to spread through the house. His father was surprised. His mental magic was very strong. Now it's the girl's turn. It takes the father's blood to suppress the holy blood. The father was frightened. Ravnar assured her he wouldn't hurt her, thinking it would only hurt him. Ravnar took out a silver needle, drawing a seal on the girl's wrist. As he did so, he wept bitterly. Tears streamed down his face. The seal disappeared. The man stood up, saying that Jiel is still young. If a strong seal is applied, she might get hurt. Also, this is her first seal, so a lot of blood will be needed. The blood of her parents. Father asked how much. Ravnar replied, 700 milliliters each. The father took his wife's hands, calming her down. He drew his sword. Cutting his wife's hand, the blood began to rise up and into Jiel's hand. The mother covered her mouth with her hand in horror, saying, "Was the saint treated like this every day?" Dell lost consciousness, due to the great loss of blood. Ravnar looked at the girl, wondering what color her eyes were, blue like her father's, or green like her mother's. If blue, he would love her like a clear sky. If they are the color of fresh foliage, he will love it as the morning rays love all the greenery of this world. He didn't care what kind of eyes she had. Gently holding the girl in his arms, he thought the important thing was that he could look at them with his own. He hugged her, praying in his head that she would grow up sooner. There are so many things he wants to do with her, he cried. He longed for a normal life where he could hear her voice and communicate by looking into her eyes. He longed for her very much. Sitting over tea, they discussed what had happened. The father wondered why Gaia had not sealed the memories properly, since she was a goddess, and whether his daughter was the reincarnation of a saint. Ravnar said, "Giving something and then taking it back is common for the gods. If it weren't for today's events, the seal might have been broken in 15 years. This situation had only accelerated the process." He quoted the words of the goddess Gaia, "I'll let you live normally until you are 15, and then do your duty as a saint for the rest of your life." He angrily asked isn't that the same as giving and then taking away? Ravnar said goodbye to the girl, holding her hand. She begged him not to leave. He apologized and promised to come back next time. If you seal the memories at 20, the age at which Maria died, she'll be safe. Until then, they shouldn't see each other, because Ravnar is the one who awakens her memories. Every 15th day of the month, he would come and seal her memory. His father looked sadly at the man's footsteps, thinking that even though he remembered everything, he could not meet her. Even though she had forgotten everything, she still longed for him. He did not understand why the goddess Gaia was so cruel. The boy looked worriedly at his sister's bedside. His father, looking very serious, told him that his sister was not a saint. In the future, she would be only Jiel. Jiel doesn't even remember what happened today. Her eyes and hair are back to the way they were before. His father continued, saying that Ed had to remember something to protect his sister. From now on, they can't be traumatized anymore because otherwise his sister's memories will come out. He looked at the boy and asked if he understood what his father was trying to tell him. Ed tensed and agreed. He promised to stay out of trouble. Jiel woke up and jumped out of her room like a scalded woman, finding that it was already lunchtime. She was greeted by her parents. Her father was pleased with her and said he thought she was a sleepy fairy, a new record for sleeping all day. Jerked his wife to confirm. The girl was a little sad. She didn't even remember falling asleep. Her father stroked her head and invited her to the table. Taking her by the hand, they walked together. The 15th day of the 1316th year of the Hellenair Empire. The day Jiel lost part of her secret. The story returns to the present time. While walking in the garden, Jiel calls out to Rav. Pulling a chair out of the bushes, she brings it over to him and stands on top of him. They look into each other's eyes, their cheeks flushed, and Jiel hears the call of the maid who had tried in vain to wake her. When she opened her eyes, Jiel didn't want to believe it was a dream. Suddenly she remembered that Rav was staying with them. She threw on her robe and ran to the window, looking around to see if he was around. When she saw Ravnar standing on the lawn by the tree, she called out to him, and he turned and waved cheerfully. Rav, seeing her revealing nightgown, blushed and waved back in embarrassment. Behind her, a maid grumbled, saying she would fall like that, and not even dressed properly. She ordered her back to her chambers. Jiel asked Rav to wait for her. He smiled silently and waved back. The man behind the tree asked if he needed to leave. Rav shifted his eyebrows, asking if he saw it. The man lowered his head, claiming he was looking at the ground. He noticed that Rav looked happy. He finally looked like a living person. Before, his face had been nothing but sadness. The man continued, saying that now Rav was smiling like like the happiest man in the world. Rav looked up. There were sounds of running from the window, something falling audibly. He said that's what happiness is. He's in 7th heaven. He hinted that a Cantum should find his happiness too. Jiel ran up to Rav happily. Seeing the stranger, she inquired who it was. The man was taken aback by the girl's beauty, and Rav introduced him as his friend. Akantum turned around in surprise, but agreed. The girl introduced herself as Rav's lover and possibly soon-to-be bride, Jiel Heim of the Heim family, and held out her hand for the man to shake. Akantum tensed, and without accepting her hand, simply bowed and introduced himself. This surprised Rav and the girl. So Rav, smiling, patted the man's chest and said that he was a regular knight, not like him. It must be a little strange for him. Jiel replied that it was fine. She asked if they had been friends since childhood, and if it was possible that Akantum was also 27 years old. He turned to look at Rav, a question on his face as to how he could convince her that they were 27 years old. Rav looked away innocently. He was embarrassed but agreed, assuming he was 27. Jiel said happily that it turns out they had grown up together since they were little, and dreamily asked what Rav had been like then, noting that he was adorable now. Akhenaten promised to tell about it the next time they met, and they said goodbye. Rav asked why she hadn't asked him that. The girl said it was more fun to hear about it from others. He suggested that it was better to ask him, since Rav had so many things he wanted to talk to her about. Jiel agreed. If he had something to say, she would certainly listen to him. She smiled so sweetly that Rav blushed. The weather was nice. Rav said he wanted to do something with Jiel on such a beautiful day and invited her to follow him. In the clearing, Jiel saw a beautiful black-as-pitch horse. She marveled at her beauty, the beast's gaze as if asking where she was looking, if this was the first time she was seeing such a dazzling divine creature. The girl hid behind Rav, thinking the horse was very large. The man threw a serious look at the beast, hinting for it to behave. The horse snorted in his face. Jiel was surprised by the horse's behavior. She seemed as emotional as a human. Ravnar asked if she liked her and offered to pet her. She looked at it, thinking that the color of its mane resembled the color of Rav's hair. So beautiful. If it bit her, it would hurt, but she still wanted to pet the animal. The man waved for the horse to come over. The beast didn't like it, because he didn't think of himself as a dog, so he kicked his hooves and bellowed angrily. He was not a pet, but a divine creature. Then the horse drew close to them and gave a long snort, showing its displeasure. The atmosphere between her and Ravnar was tense, and they stared menacingly into each other's eyes. Jiel marveled at the horse's strength and size, saying it was the first time she had ever seen one. Ravnar said his friend had brought her. He assured her that although he looked vicious, he wouldn't bite her. He threw his arm around the animal's neck and smiled at it, letting it know he had no other choice. With his other hand, he took Jiel's hand and placed it on the horse's muzzle. The girl stroked it. The beast was surprised. It felt good. Jiel admired the horse, saying how soft it was. She sat back with a satisfied grin and enjoyed herself. Ravnar lowered his head with a sigh, thinking the divine creature had been tamed. The girl asked if he had called her to ride a horse. Ravnar fell into a memory. When the saint was a little girl, she had brought a starving kitty to the palace. When the priests saw this, they were furious. They considered the filthy beast not worthy of a saint and ordered the saint to be taken away to solitary confinement to be purified. The priest dragged the saint until she could not take her eyes off the poor kitten that was about to be thrown away, and the child was locked in a cold room. After this incident, the saint no longer touched the animals, but simply watched them from a distance. The saint was standing outside the castle admiring the horses. She was spotted by Avion. He approached her and asked if she wanted a ride. A beautiful snow-white horse stood beside him. He assured her that everything would be all right, for the horse was tame. Her eyes lit up with interest, and she agreed. As suddenly, with a shout on his horse, Darth, the head of Reborn and also Avion's father, came rushing towards them. He hated the saint because his son had left home and become a knight because of his love for this girl. He tore her feelings to shreds and tore them apart. The saint left, though the knight desperately called out to her and begged her to stay. Falling to his knees, he prayed to Gaia. He wanted so much to see the saint smile. He asked the goddess to set this girl free. Ravnar leaned over to Jiel and offered her a ride. He asked the girl to wait and quickly harnessed the horse. He reassured her that everything would be fine. He would help her into the saddle. As she sat down, Jiel noticed how close Ravnar's lips were. She really wanted to kiss him, but she was plagued by doubts. She blushed, but still hesitated to do so. Rav asked what was wrong. Jiel kept repeating, "Po." He couldn't understand her, when suddenly she looked at the horse and asked what her name was, saying that the name Poppy would suit her. The man laughed. He said she didn't have a name yet, so they called her Great One, but if she wanted to, they could call her Poppy. The horse turned around angrily, looking at them questioningly. Protesting, she clopped her hooves and snorted angrily, drool splattering in all directions. Jiel thought she didn't like it. Rav kicked the horse, and she calmed down, thinking he thought he could do whatever he wanted simply because he was a contractor. Jiel decided that such a name wouldn't suit the stallion after all. The man reassured her, telling her it was a girl. The girl happily turned to the horse, calling her Poppy. The horse was unpleasantly surprised, she thought. When the contract was over, she would run away without turning around. Ravnar couldn't take his eyes off Jiel. He wondered if she could smile like that, and he didn't know. Wish they could ride like that forever? He would give anything for that. The man offered her breakfast. Yariel thought that feeling hungry was absolutely not important right now. She would like to sit like this all day. He almost understood her thoughts, and added that they could continue after breakfast. Ravnar gently dismounted Jeriel from his horse, saying he would like to get something before breakfast, but only she could help with it. He asked if she would refuse him. The girl got excited as to what it could be. He caught her in his arms and told her it was just for tonight, then gently kissed her chin. They both blushed with embarrassment. Rav set Yariel on the ground. She looked into his beautiful eyes and reached up and kissed him on the lips. The horse, not wanting to disturb their tenderness, galloped away. Their long, tender kiss turned passionate, and Rav pressed the girl against the wall, holding her hands. Rav turned around and grabbed the blade of the dagger that was flying at him. It was Ed who had taken them by surprise. The man let go of Jeriel's hand, and she was upset that it was over. Ravnar touched her face, apologizing for his haste, for she was still too young. She was ashamed to admit that she wanted more. Ed walked up to his sister in anger and pushed Rav away, calling him a thief and emphasizing that they weren't even engaged. Rav was embarrassed by his infatuation. Jeriel didn't understand her brother. It happened all the time between boyfriend and girlfriend. There was nothing to be angry about. He grabbed her hand and led her away. She didn't dare contradict him and only said goodbye to Rav. Rav sat down on the ground. He thought sadly that patience was his best character trait. Past. Saint sits in her room and dreamily draws herself an avion with colored pencils, not knowing how to represent the silver color. There was a knock at the door. It was Avion. He went out to him and spread a cloak on the floor. They sat down on it, and the saint showed him the drawing. The man's eyes shone with joy. He got excited and asked if it was for him. Maria nodded embarrassedly, saying she hadn't had a chance to color it silver. He took her hand, explaining that he hated his hair. If it weren't for his silver eyes and hair and her golden ones, they would be ordinary people. He would wait for her to grow up. And then, they'd get to know each other better. And if that time came, he'd wait for her. Avion looked pitifully at the girl, saying that in general he was still waiting because he really wanted her to belong to him. He touched her face, but Maria turned away sharply. He averted a chagrined look, saying he had made a mistake and asking her not to take it personally. The man continued that if rebirth exists, he would like the same black hair as in the drawing, and when the time came, he would find it. The girl got up abruptly and left. Locking the door, she sat down on the floor with her face in her lap. She thought that if the time really came, she would answer honestly, just the way he wanted her to. It's a beautiful sunny morning. Jeriel was looking through the tubes of paint. She was sad looking at them, tears welling up in her eyes. A maid came in, inviting the young mistress to breakfast. The girl scurried around the room, knowing that Rav was there as well. The maid sighed, for Jeriel was used to rejecting all offers from princes. The girl looked out and said he was different. He was very handsome. Kidahin, the first prince, gave her a huge green gemstone. The second prince, Alphonse, showered her with compliments and made her a platinum statue. But Yariel refused them all. Neither expensive stones nor her own statue could melt her heart, because she really liked the attractive appearance. Avion's name is enshrined in Ribari literature. He was as beautiful in words as he was in pictures. So handsome that entire families lined up to ask for his hand in marriage. People said when he closed his eyes, stargazing began, and when he opened them, their breath caught. He is the only one of the Ribari family who is remembered for his looks, not his abilities. Moreover, after his rebirth, his entire entourage had strikingly beautiful looks. Yariel thought, logically, that he had high standards. The maid asked what fragrance the young lady would choose today. She asked for the fragrance of a mature lady, such as the scent of roses, the one he would like. She liked the smell. She thought it would suit him too. Anna said she would give the perfume to the person who serviced him. The maid asked why she had gotten the paints out so early. Jeriel replied cheerfully that she wanted to paint Rav. Jeriel has excellent motor skills. In spite of her clumsiness, she often did things like knitting, embroidery, and cooking. She is also very good at drawing. Even artists praise her. The woman had taken the hint that the young lord was sparring with the duke today. Wouldn't her brother be upset if she only drew his rival? Jeriel thought it would be too embarrassing to paint alone, so she decided to call Estelle. No sooner had Estelle entered the house than Yariel came at her with a hug. The girl started to shove her away, but Yariel was too persistent and happy to see her. Estelle covered her flushed face with her fan, She liked Jiel's gentle nature and kind heart. Ever since she was a child, she began to grow tired of people getting close to her because of her family and status, and then discussing behind her back. Jiel was the first to genuinely befriend her when she didn't have any real friends. The girl was very sociable, so she had a wide social circle, but she boldly broke off communication with those who insulted Estelle, and was the only one who really thought Estelle was beautiful and amazing. Jiel had always been like that. Shoving a box of paints to Estelle, she told her that she was painting Rav and Estelle Ed. The girl hesitated, then attacked Jiel indignantly. The girl pleaded, saying she would cook her something in gratitude. Estelle shouted that she was not an animal to be sold to her for food. At the sparring session, Ravnar praises Ed, saying he's always had admirable skills when he spars with him, thinking he'll never be a master. Ed replied that Rav wasn't from a knightly family, and he'd been holding a sword since he learned to walk, but he'd heard that Rav had first taken up the hilt at 13. He emphasized that Rav was much better than him, having been a master for 10 years. After a drink of water, the man said that Ed was good at everything. It was hard to believe that he hardly practiced at all, so he would definitely succeed in the hunter competition soon. Ed wondered, saying whether Rav thought it was odd that the prey were abruptly announced as monsters a week before the competition. The boy thought they were too dangerous after all. He asked Rav if the monsters were like his family. Rav replied that not all monsters listened to him. The man continued, "Their master is the magical deity Chaos. If the goddess Gaia is a hypocrite, he is." He was interrupted by the arrival in good spirits of Jiel, and not quite Estelle. They greeted each other. Jiel happily announced that the girls had decided to paint. She would paint him, but first she offered to eat. Jiel opened the basket and began to put out all sorts of cookies. She told me that there were fig cookies, strawberry jam cookies, candies, crackers, whatever my heart desired. Rav looked at her pitifully, saying she had worked so hard to make it for them. Everything was so beautiful. How could he eat it? The girl happily handed him a plate of fig cookies, telling him that if she remembered correctly, he liked the mild flavor, not the cloyingly sweet. Ravnar took a bite of the cookie and smiled, praising its wonderful flavor. Estelle and Ed were sitting across from them, and their tenderness was clearly not to their liking. Jiel said that Estelle had agreed to draw Ed. Estelle looked up and proudly confirmed it. Ed was shocked enough to drop the cookies. She resented Ed's displeasure, but he only replied that he had never seen her paint. An argument started between them. Jiel and Rav looked at them and decided that they were perfect for each other. Jiel, confused, asked Rav who was serving him. She wanted to know something. He was surprised. Anna saw what was happening and mentally prayed that he wouldn't speak. Otherwise, the Duke's innocence would be over. The man hesitated, saying he hadn't asked her name, but she was brunette, brown eyes, and tall. He was interrupted by Anna coming up to them, insistently offering tea to the Duke. Rav took it. Estelle sat with Ed at the table, sketching. He handed her a plate of cookies, saying she didn't eat them much, but he knew she liked them. The girl blushed and said that the models must sit quietly and still. Otherwise, she didn't guarantee that she could draw it well. Ed watched Estelle. He wondered how hard she was trying and if her hands had always been so small. Estelle was uncomfortable with his gaze, but she persisted. Setting up the easel, Jiel was glad for the chance to look at Rav for as long as she wanted. She concentrated on drawing her lover sitting in front of her. The man stood up, peering curiously at the canvas. He was shocked by what he saw. Jiel had painted the two of them holding hands. She closed the drawing embarrassedly, forbidding him to look at the unready work. Rav froze, looking very sad. He wondered if Jiel knew that she used to paint too, and already that was enough to please him. But he couldn't help it when she didn't have enough materials. It was the most precious gift to him. Ravnar kept thinking that she was regretting that incident, which was why she was painting the same picture and couldn't budge. Estelle finished drawing. Her drawing was awful. Ed thought she had drawn a potato. He tried to thank her very tactfully, saying that she had discovered a new sense of beauty while they were apart. So fresh and creative, he promised to cherish it. Jiel shows the finished drawing to Rav. She said quite contentedly that she liked the way his eyes turned out. These paints were a gift from her father, and she loved to paint with them. They gave a lot of color. Memories of Maria popped into his head, of her telling him that she didn't have enough colors to capture him in a drawing. And Rav had said it was perfect. He liked it very much. It was the best gift he'd ever gotten. He looked happy. Jiel promised to draw again later. and he asked that next time she would paint them under the moonlight, and just like when they'd held hands. He mentally prayed that those painful memories would be filled with nothing but happiness from now on. The 25th day of the 1320th year of the Hellenair Empire. Every 5 years, a hunting competition is held a few days after the Ribari. There was a rumor that got a lot of attention this year that there were going to be some real monsters on it. Her mother was sick and asked Jiel to go and support the family, and her mother too. As she rode in the carriage, Jiel admired the beautiful green foliage. She turned to Ravnar, asking about Poppy since he was planning on taking her to the competition. The man replied that he had sent her to a friend. She would be happy to hear that Jiel was worried about her. As they stepped out of the carriage, they met Estelle, and Jiel immediately rushed to hug her with a shriek. Dad asked Rav if Poppy was the divine beast green, and if he had named him that, he emphasized that Rav's knack for picking names was just awful. Ravnar, enraged, rudely replied that the correct answer was Greenfin, not green. And he wondered what it was that the Marquis of Poppy didn't like. The man was very surprised at this reaction. After all, he had started this conversation for fun. He wondered who would even call a horse that, and Rav said, "Jiel." The Marquis was extremely surprised. He laughed merrily and patted Rav on the shoulder, saying, "What a nice name, isn't his daughter cute?" The men were setting off, the girls wishing them good luck. Estelle noticed the blue hatchhole on Ed's sword, like his eyes, and asked who had given it to him. Jiel replied that of course she was, for he was not yet betrothed. She rushed to hug Estelle joyfully, saying that she would be over the moon if she married him. The girl was very embarrassed and asked Jiel not to bullshit, but to watch the event that was about to begin. The emperor was giving a speech. For the first time in history, they would be hunting monsters. He ordered to compete and show how strong the Hellenair Empire was. A servant notified the emperor that most of the imperial troops, including the 5 swordmasters, had entered the hunting grounds. The participants were safe because they were hunting small monsters. However, others were in danger. Families, friends, lovers who came to support them. People dear to the contestants. A downpour had descended. Jiel hid in her tent, peering through the impenetrable veil, hoping no one would catch cold. From a neighboring tent came the emperor's worried voice. The girl trembled, not understanding why all of a sudden, Estelle came over to her and took her hand, reassuring her that everything was all right. She saw the prince in the imperial tent, laughing viciously, and it scared her. Suddenly the downpour stopped, lightning struck, and people saw a flying creature in the sky. A loud clap of thunder, and something fell to the ground. It was a monster. Meanwhile, the men were hunting low-level monsters the size of hares. It wasn't the first time Ravnar had seen frightened birds flying from the direction of the tents. Tucking his sword into its scabbard, Ed saw that his hatchhole had cracked. Rav was sure something was going on. The tent city was attacked by many huge winged monsters. They tore people to shreds. People ran from place to place in panic. Jiel looked on in horror at what was happening and didn't know what she should do now. One of the monsters noticed her, and he approached her, blood dripping from his mouth. Estelle covered her friend with herself, urging Siegel to help them. A huge fire spirit appeared and began destroying the monster with flames. The monster screamed wildly. Jiel prayed that it was someone who would stop it. There was a burst of magic, a seal lit up, and Akhentam appeared to them. He grabbed the girls and carried them up the mountain. He placed the dome over the monsters. Exhaling, he wondered why these high-level creatures flew here. Who could have made them do this? Estelle raised her fan at the man. Jiel stopped her, saying it was Rav's friend. She opened her eyes and saw death. There were rivers of blood all around. Her eyes glittered gold. She didn't know what to do. The little boy looked down and conducted the twig. He was amazed at how it could have ended like this. Heaven. The boy, a chaos deity, didn't want to take away the opportunity to meet her after all this time, but it was obvious that when that woman came, she would immediately nag him. He thought for a moment and waved his arms with determination. Lightning struck and shattered the dome. Another swing and Akhentam was sealed, the boy ordered, returning it to its master. And he disappeared. The girls stood dumbfounded, not knowing what to do now. The creatures crawled out of the forest, and Estelle called for Siegel. That scared the monsters away a bit. Jiel grabbed Estelle's hand, asking how they were going to get out. Jiel was very worried that Estelle should not be hurt in any way. She was determined to protect her. She thought that even if she took the blow, immediately, and she cried out in pain. Estelle leaned over Jiel. She turned around. The creatures were gathering around them. She pondered what to do, seeing no safe place. Out of desperation, she screamed, asking for help. She couldn't hold her spirits for long. Her strength was running out. Jiel opened her eyes. Estelle called out to her as she suddenly started coughing up blood and fell unconscious. Jiel looked at Estelle dying. She heard people screaming for help, and she cried. She felt she had to save everyone because she was a saint. Her hair and eyes turned golden. Estelle opened her eyes. She was surprised. Jiel reassured her she would protect her because she couldn't be harmed. The magic seal flashed. An angry Ravnar descended from the sky. He began to bind the monsters one by one with threads and tear their bodies. He heard his name being called as Avion. Terrified, he turned back around. He saw the golden-haired Jiel and rushed towards her. He wiped her tears from her face, telling her that now he was there for her. No one would dare hurt her. They embraced. Jiel said Estelle was hurt. People were suffering. She should help them. He cried out that she shouldn't do that. She should only help her friends and the people who helped her. He convinced her that she wasn't a saint. She was Jiel. The girl walked up to Estelle and dripped blood on her right from her mouth. Ravnar realized she had bitten her tongue and rushed to beg her to stop. Jiel looked at Ravnar. He was crying bitterly. She remembered the promise she had made to the knight, to live for him. Then she said she made a decision to live only for him. From now on, she is a saint only to her friends. She touched his face, promising him that she would only help them. Jiel froze, closing her eyes. Ravnar watched and could not believe his eyes. The girl was using the seal on herself, voluntarily getting rid of her power and memories. Tears streamed uncontrollably down his face. He wondered if she would really live for him. Heaven. Chaos is furious. He was ordered to stop killing. He asked if he really had to quit and if he could have another go. Goddess Gaia sighed, saying that he was acting too stupid to be called a god. She was furious that he was killing the people she loved just for fun. She reprimanded him because he had opened a breach in the human world. The demons were furious, let alone the poor humans. Chaos made it a point to kill demons too. He heard the alarm bell ring. He created a mirror in the air showing Jiel and asked Gaia if her daughter had gone against her will. Chaos said he shouldn't have sent her. If she had listened to him, then Avion wouldn't have left either. Because of her, he was separated from the only family member he held so dear. Gaia was at the end of her patience. He asked if she craved his soul, saying he did too. But what can you do? He's a tough guy. She turned around and walked away, telling him to stop talking her teeth. He wondered why he couldn't talk about Ravnar. He's not an outcast after all. He emphasized that Ravnar was a member of his family. Why not talk about him in a nice way? Gaia turned around, looking at Chaos, and said that he really isn't an outcast. He remains her family too. Reaching the door, she was stopped by Chaos, asking her why she didn't take care of the saint. Or did she decide to leave things as they were again? Why did she create her in the first place then? Gaia slammed the door silently. Jiel collapsed into Ravnar's arms. He touched her hair and thought, did she really care for him so much that she had decided to give up the duties of a saint that she considered so important? Could he afford to wish for more? A rustle was heard in the bushes. The possessed prince emerged from them, saying that human bodies were too weak. He barely had the strength to reach them. He opened his arms and shouted joyfully, welcoming his son. Rav squeezed out Chaos in shock. Chaos emphasized that it was rather rude of him to say his name so coldly. Chaos prostrated himself in front of Ravnar, urging him to return to the afterlife. He would never be like these people. He would be a god. She's just a weak person. She's just like Gaia. At the end of his imposing speech, he called him to the demon realm. Ravnar turned around and gravely said that if he touched her, he would not live. Chaos was upset by his reaction. He asked him why he hated him so much. He really didn't want to hurt them. No one was going to die. He just wanted to tease Ravnar a little, saying it was a petty joke. And actually, Ravnar should be grateful to him, for it was only because of him that he was able to meet his saint. Ravnar got angry, ordering Chaos not to call her a saint. He said that Chaos wanted to become a god by stealing the soul of a saint, which is exactly what he had planned all along. He took Jiel in his arms, and they flew away. Chaos thought it was time for him to go too, but seeing that his son's technique was rather clumsy, he decided to help finish Ravnar's job and destroyed the bodies. He laughed, and the prince's body collapsed to the ground. Flying through the sky, Rav summoned a greenfin. A plush toy of a horse appeared in front of him. Rav said he had noticed her attitude towards him since last time. He ordered her to go to Acanthum and tell him to bring the Marquis and Ed to Castle Heim. Ed would probably be concerned, so she should tell him that they were all right. The horse arrived on the scene. There was blood and scattered bodies everywhere, and grieving survivors. She saw Akantam and headed towards him. His father was rubbing Akantam by the scruff of the neck, demanding he explain why he couldn't use space travel magic. Ravnar hadn't disappeared after all. Akantam replied succinctly. He was summoned by the Master, and demons cannot move spontaneously in space. Even though the Master is gone, they will all be fine. They didn't notice the horse coming toward them until their father grabbed it with anger, shouting where Jiel and Estelle were now. The horse took its last breath to tell her that the Master had asked her to tell them that the girls were safe, and they should leave for High Manor immediately. The horse settled down on Akantam's shoulder. The Marquis went to the carriage, finding the coachman dead. He felt sorry for him, decided that he would take full responsibility for his family, and wished him to rest in peace. Akantham said that they would use magic from now on, and immediately the Marquis and the young lord took to the sky. In flight, Ed regarded the wings of the Akantham. They looked like huge bat wings. He asked the demon why the monsters were attacking humans in a place they didn't belong. The man replied that it was the devil's work. He's interested in the king. He probably did it to attract attention and to see his reaction. The only child the devil loves is King Ravnar, and the king's wings were a gift from the devil himself. Father was upset, thinking that gods are as selfish as humans. Ed wondered and asked if Ravnar had wings like Akantham. He had never seen them after all. The demon replied that in fact, Mr. Ravnar could not have wings, because he has a human soul in a demonic body. Akantam exhaled heavily, saying that in brief, Revnar-san became a demon in an extremely unusual way. He is a sinless human. My father turned around in surprise, asking how that was possible. The man said there were two ways to become a demon. The first is if the parents themselves are demons. The second, if the soul is on the verge of destruction. In the second case, the gates of heaven will not open, because the gods are unwilling to accept such souls, and then the soul becomes a primitive demon that does not live long at all. Mr. Ravnar didn't become a demon in the first or second way. There's a third way, the rarest, when the soul itself jumps into the fire and endures endless pain until it gets approval from the devil. If you become a demon in this way, you can gain immense power, but few people are able to endure it. He had endured this hellish pain for over 100 years. For a normal person, this would have been impossible. It was impossible to moan in pain or ask for help. He didn't even know when it would end. Akantham had served him for over 20 years, but never once had he seen him smile. Always blank and indifferent, they were not the eyes of a living being. However, on the saint's birthday, he first saw him with a smile on his face, and now he smiles like the happiest man in the world. For that reason, he told them his story. They hung in the air for a while and silently went on their way. They entered the room where the sick lay. The father rushed to his daughter, and Ed asked why Estelle wasn't waking up. Ravnar explained that she was being treated with holy blood. The spirit she had summoned to protect Jiel was returned to that world. She and her internal organs were badly damaged. Ed sat down in the chair beside her bed and took her hand, looking sadly into her face. Ed asked Ravnar what the devil was like. He ruffled his hair, asking if he remembered what Rav had said about Gaia. The boy answered in the affirmative, and the man said that Gaia was a devil's supporter. The devil, meanwhile, was busy cooking and watching Ravnar through the magic mirror. Rav said confidently that the devil was just crazy, past. In the cave, Avian weeps for the loss of Mary, holding her in his arms and begging her not to leave him. Mary's spirit stood behind him. She asked not to be taken to heaven, as Avion was desperate. He began to strangle himself, and Maria cried, blaming herself. She begged the goddess to let her save him. Gaia was watching her. She said she understood. She was the one who gave her such a cruel fate. But if she hesitated on her way to the heavenly gates, her soul might go off course. She promised to make sure she was born and lived near him in the next life. Maria asked what would happen to Avion if she left now. The goddess replied that she would see to it that he returned to the empire and continued to live a peaceful life. She swore to her, calling to her. Mary could not leave Avion until he died. She would be his guardian angel. Gaia could not fulfill her request. If she became his guardian angel, he could never be reborn again. She said she would allow her to return to him as she wished, calling her to her again. Maria asked to stay with Avion until the gates of heaven closed, and Gaia agreed. She rushed to Avion and hugged him. The goddess had promised to grant her the next life. She decided she would live it only for herself. If he wants her love, she will give him her whole heart. If he doesn't want her to be a saint, she won't be one. She will use her powers only for him. Maria promised in the next life she would not make him cry. In the next life, she would become a sincere person and live without hiding anything. She had always wanted to tell Avion that she loved him. She was sorry she had never been able to admit it. She had gone to heaven, and Gaia had saved Avion. She tried to seal his memories. The memories of the saint should be sealed, but the soul's resistance is too great. She separated them, not knowing that their feelings were so strong. Darth searched for his son. The goddess spoke to him, telling him that the knight was with the saint in the cave. She ordered him to arrange a funeral for the dead woman, and to restore the glory to the knight Rabari who protected the saint. He went into the cave and took his son out of there. He didn't even pay attention to the saint. The funeral of the saint took place according to a prophecy from heaven. Avion slept soundly. He dreamed of Maria, tears streaming down his face. His father shouted, ordering him to find a way to wake his son. He hadn't woken up in 5 days. Avion jumped out of bed and headed toward the exit, toward Maria. It was pouring outside, and he thought she didn't like the cold. He should hurry to her. His father slapped his face. He shouted at him, telling him that he had given him everything. Because of some woman, he was willing to turn his back on his own father. Avion stared lifelessly somewhere, unresponsive to his father's words. The boy turned to the window, opened it, and tried to jump out, but his father ordered the guards to stop him. He was telling his son to vent his anger on him, to hit his elderly father. Avion cried. He shouted that he was not his father, that he was the Duke of Ribéry, and that Avion was just a paladin. His father hit him with all his might that he fell, and wanted to beat him further. But Avion stopped his fist and cried out in despair that she had done nothing wrong. They accepted her as a saint and then cast her away like a witch. He asked if they were sane. It could have been fixed. They could have just listened to her. And the father replied that he was idle because of his behavior. He had turned his back on Ribéry. He had turned his back on him. He had no need to help the saint. Avion yelled that he could at least not make her a witch. Walking away, he told his father to stay away from him. He was going to Maria. His father shouted that the saint was dead. He couldn't do anything. She was already dead. He fell to his knees. He didn't want to believe his father's words. The man was telling him that it was all his fault. If it wasn't for his behavior, he wouldn't have been so harsh. If he hadn't turned his back on Ribéry, he wouldn't have even had such a thought. Father said that Avion had killed the saint. He clutched his chest, and father called for a doctor. Avion thought his father was right. He should have been content to watch her from afar, but greed got the better of him. And in the end, he ruined Maria. The father sat at his son's bedside, saying he had lied. He was responsible for the death of the saint, not Avion. He killed her and drove his son away. He was solely to blame for all his sins. He begged his son for a sip of water. The 15th day of the 1000th year of the Hellenaire Empire, Knight Avion had died. The paladin's body was drenched in grief. The man who had completely refused to eat or drink could not be saved. Avion walked down the stairs to the door with the bright light. Up ahead he saw a woman with golden hair. He ran towards her, thinking it was Maria. As he got closer, he realized it wasn't her, but she looked so much like her. It was Gaia. She reached out to him and he pushed her away. She said that Mary was waiting for him at the gates of heaven. He wanted to see her. He missed Mary very much. Gaia said that after many years, the saint's soul would be sent back to the world of the living. When that time came, she would allow them to make a fresh start. She gives his soul peace, so he needs to forget all his sorrows and start over. And she called him with her. He was furious. How could he forget everything, he asked her. She wanted him to feel regret over and over again for Mary's death. Refusing, he turned around and walked away. She promised that she would grant her the life of an aristocrat and seal her abilities for a time. Avion shouted that even if he fell into the abyss, taking God's wrath upon himself, he would not let her live as a saint again. He would not enter the gates of heaven, even as a spirit, but he would protect her. There was a voice saying that he would be too weak to be a spirit. Avion turned around and saw a creature with a cloak and wings. It offered to help him. The creature thought, since it was a soul, It might be gripped by a sense of fear, but the way it confronted the sky god made it curious. The creature was thrashing around Avion, praising how strong his soul was. Having been reborn so many times, he really did like him a lot. The creature offered to go with him. The door opened, a nightmare reeking from it. The creature had warned that many people had died going through that door. Even he wouldn't want to experience that. Gaia became indignant, stopping chaos. He asked not to be interrupted, and again suggested Avion follow him, only he would need to hold out for a few centuries. In return, he would be granted powerful strength and reborn without losing his memories. Gaia tried to change his mind, and a quarrel broke out between the goddess and Chaos. And Chaos asked what his answer was. After a moment's hesitation, he decided he would make that choice himself. He walked through the door to the pleading cries of Gaia. Centuries on fire. If he could endure the suffering, he would gain great power. There has not yet been a soul who has lasted more than 50 years. Chaos couldn't believe he had survived this. He had been reborn, just as he had wanted, but it didn't put a smile on his face. Chaos asked what name he would bear. Cutting his hair with a dagger, he answered Ravnar. He inquired if he liked it. Ravnar didn't answer, looking at him. The creature said that the wings were part of him, but he didn't want them, since he had a human soul. Ravnar wondered how strong he was. The devil said there was someone stronger than him, but the second seat was vacant. While Chaos was talking his teeth, the man asked where he could find Maria. He replied that she would be reborn for a long time yet. In the past, anyone could come to this place, but now demons appear in the human world and many people die. That's why she blocked the path, just because she doesn't like it. But demons are on their own turf, and they're able to come to the Demon King's beck and call. Ravnar's eyes flashed with interest. He thought the Demon King would be stronger than he was, so Chaos offered to kill the Demon King. If he so desired, the devil would kill the Demon King. If Ravnar called him Pope, he would kill them all as soon as he asked. Ravnar turned around and walked away. 10 years later. Watching Ravnar through a magical mirror, Chaos praised his merits. Just 10 years later, he overthrew him and became the Demon King. Standing by the Demon King's body, Ravnar initiated his brother Akhentom into his service. Akhentom knelt and swore to serve the Demon King for the rest of his life. Chaos appeared. Mentes, the Demon King, grabbed his leg and complained that it was not permissible for someone with a human soul to poison the Demon King with impunity. Chaos finished the Demon King and began to praise Ravnar. He was proud that he had come all this way alone, and it had only taken 10 years. The man waved the devil away. He offered a reward. Tearing off his wings, he gave them to Ravnar. He thought they looked good on him. He offered to move them around to see if everything was okay. He spread his wings. They were beautiful. Chaos asked if he wanted to thank Daddy. The devil said it's been 110 years. He can see Maria. Ravnar arrived at the White Castle. He touched the walls and wished she was no longer here. A bell sounded, drawing attention to itself, and Ravnar flew toward it. From above, he saw the huge statue of Mary. He wondered if she'd been happy that day. He was afraid he couldn't remember her face. From now on, he would come here whenever he missed her. Thanks to the statue, he can see her face. He cried, wiping away his tears. Ravnar saw a plaque on the ground. It read, "Here rests my son and saint, Darth Rabari." Dirt lived a life of regret after the death of his son, fell into despair and lost all his authority. Longing every day, he slowly withered away. But before his death, he gathered the most famous artisans throughout the empire to create a statue of a saint and a paladin. Ravnar sank to his knees. He cried. He didn't want to forgive his father for what he had done, even if it was in the past. He would hate him to the very end.